Welcome to another edition of the All Cardinals podcast, the very first edition of the All Cardinals Draft Talk podcast. I am Donnie, Druin, joined by Andrew Harbaugh. Nobody has really seen Andrew on this channel before, mostly Richie Bradshaw. Shout out to my boy. Andrew is probably one of the more bright minds on hashtag draft Twitter whenever it comes to analyzing the draft. A friend of mine for a very, very long time, obviously writes for allcardinals.com or si.com/NFL/Cardinals. For those keeping tabs at home. We've been talking about doing this for a while now, Andrew, and with the Cardinals picking at number 3 in the 2023 NFL draft, what better time to get this going than right now?
Yeah, no, and there's so many different angles that are already starting to develop. You've got NFLPA Bowl is going on, practices. You've got East-West Shrine Game players are going to be landing. I saw their leader, Eric Alco, was just talking about that on Twitter. And then next week you got the Senior Bowl. So the draft's here, and if you're a Cardinals fan, your season really started the minute I think Kyler Murray's ACL decided to tear, unfortunately. So I think this is the best time to get going into it. This is where all ESPN's diving into it. All the big wigs are going into it, but this is the only place I think you're really going to get a lot of focus on Cardinals talk, and that's what we're here for.
No, absolutely. And so much to break down too. And obviously we'll get to every aspect and every angle possible whenever it comes to how the Cardinals can attack. Talking is hard. The 2023 draft. New GM Monty Austinfort definitely has his work cut out for him. He's got an entire loaded offseason full of questions that he's going to have to answer, him and his staff. But obviously, we'll go take a look at just the general draft order right now. You have Chicago and Houston. And Andrew, by the way, I still cannot believe Houston screwed themselves out of the #1 pick by actually winning a game in the final week of the season.
Yeah, Lovie Smith, it will forever be a Chicago Bear through and through. Yeah. So. I definitely, I don't, obviously you want to win, and players play to win the game, not to quote former Arizona State head coach Herm Edwards there, but no, I think that Houston team's not bad. Like you see 3-13, like I think it's eerily similar to how Detroit was last year, where Detroit on paper, like you don't have a lot of names popping off on that Houston roster, but there's a lot of guys that play hard, and they showed that winning that last game of the year. I think that they could have a very similar turnaround to Detroit, but again, it is still comically hilarious that they lost it and won at the same time.
Yeah, dude, losing and winning. So obviously the Bryce Young sweepstakes are going to be underway. Not a lot of people expect Chicago to take a quarterback at #1. In fact, I think the overwhelming consensus at this point in time is Chicago moving out of that pick. But the big question is who's going to jump ahead to #1 to assumingly take it. Bryce Young, it could be CJ Stroud, it could be Will Levis, which we'll get to here in a little bit. But I think whenever you and I were talking, trying to set this podcast up, we both kind of agreed, not that this is groundbreaking news, but like the Cardinals are in a very good spot at #3 for them not needing a quarterback. Now, there's two big major defensive cornerstones, potentially franchise-changing, franchise-altering players that could be at their disposal. We talked about Young possibly going #1. #2 is kind of up in the air as far as what Houston wants to do. You assume they'll take a quarterback, but every team has their guy. Obviously trading back and getting capital isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I did want to get into two guys, kind of the highlights of the draft for anybody not named a quarterback. The first one being Will Anderson, and you talk about such a dynamic guy coming off the edge for Alabama. I mean, the last 2 years, if you just look at the short resume we put together here, Lombardi, Bronco Nagurski, Chuck Bednarik, the Lott Trophy, 2-time SEC Defensive Player of the Year, a unanimous All-American, 2 times running heading into the draft. And, his stats not that they're bad, but they're not like gaudy. They're not crazy college football numbers, but when he plays for Alabama, it's just incredibly effective and just insane the things he does as a defensive player.
Yeah, and you talked about the production a little bit. One of my favorite little fun facts, and I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but he had more tackles for loss his sophomore year of college, or his freshman year of college, than he did his senior year of high school. So he went from playing and dominating high school, being a 5-star recruit and everything, to jumping into the SEC and somehow outproducing what he did in high school that got everyone's attention in the first place. So production has been there through and through for him. This year, there was a little bit of a drop-off. But again, just Alabama had a drop-off this year, if you can call it drop-off being a New Year's Eve bowl victory, blowout victory over Kansas State. But that being said, you look back at previous edge rushers that have gone at the top of the draft or the top end of the draft. Myles Garrett, you've got Jadeveon Clowney. All of them were really hyped their sophomore year. Clowney had the big hit. Myles Garrett has the freakish physique that still gets drug tested every other week, I think, that he's posting about. They all had drop-offs their last year in college because everyone knows about them and everyone game plans around them. And for Alabama, they didn't have anybody else really to take advantage or take the eyes off of Anderson. So he was getting a lot of double teams and stuff like that. But I think that Clowney turned out to be okay once he was healthy. Myles Garrett has certainly proved to be more than okay in Cleveland, being a Pro Bowler, All-Pro. I think Will Anderson will be in the same boat, and especially if that's who the Cardinals go with. We've talked about this before. The minute I texted you, the minute J.J. Watt retired, I was like, edge has to be the focus now. And like Zach Allen's going to be a free agent coming off a great year. You don't know what he's going to be going to get paid in free agency, because after quarterbacks get paid the most, the next person that gets paid the highest is the person chasing the quarterbacks. Yep. And when you have 30-some free agents and you have a new GM, he's really going to want to bring his guys in. And we don't know what Zach Allen's going to fit into that. But I think Will Anderson would be a cornerstone for this defense to build around. I mean, I say that with Budda Baker behind him. More pressure helps those guys out, Byron Murphy, Marco Wilson, all of them. So once you get pressure going, you're going to force bad throws. Bad throws lead to turnovers when you've got those guys behind you. And more plays for Kyler Murray in that offense to score points is what this team needs.
No, absolutely. And you look at the Cardinals offense, and obviously everybody knows exactly how dynamic they can be whenever they're all healthy and on the field, which is something that never really happened last year. The defensive side of the ball, and this even bleeds into like the head coaching search. Like they obviously need to take their game to the next level with all of the names and all the talent across the board. And not to mention, we talked about Zach Allen being a free agent. Byron Murphy's a free agent too. So, in a worst case scenario where they lose him, the emphasis on getting to the quarterback is going to be higher than ever. And even if they do re-sign Zach Allen, I mean, taking Will Anderson at number 3 is almost as close to a home run hit as you can get at the 3rd spot right there. But you look at the other edge guys in Arizona. You have Marcus Golden, who severely just did not get the job done, did not live up to the hype that he was supposed to bring coming back from New York. And then you look at 2 younger guys in Cam Thomas and Myjai Sanders, who admittedly I thought they developed finally as the year went on, but I don't think by any stretch they have established themselves as like a starter moving forward, Yeah,
no, and for Myjai Sanders, I liked him as a prospect, but again, he was a project, and you knew that coming out of it. And they have several projects that they can wait for. But the thing is, again, Ozofort's going to be able to overhaul this roster the way he wants. And I'm sure he does not want to wait and be patient necessarily, but he also has to be at the same time. I think Will Anderson, again, just like we saw, if you watched Hard Knocks, you couldn't come away not loving J.J. Watt and what he brought to that room. I think Will Anderson can bring that same thing where he's going to hold everyone accountable. That's an Alabama thing. That's a Nick Saban thing, and that's going to come with him. You've heard Saban talk about his leadership, and Minkah Fitzpatrick is still his favorite player he's ever had, but I believe he said Will Anderson's right up there with Minkah, and you've seen what Minkah can do in Pittsburgh and Miami before that. So leadership also comes with Will Anderson, and when you've got a locker room and especially a defensive edge room that's developing, you need to maintain that leadership and accountability, and Will Anderson brings that as well, not just on the field but off the field.
No, absolutely. That's something you definitely never want to worry about either. The character concerns, any of that. Will Anderson, as far as my knowledge extends, is a squeaky clean track record. And then, like you talked about, just not only like the leadership off and on the field, but we have to remember this guy came into an Alabama franchise program historically known for not playing freshmen because there's so much 5- and 4-star talent literally across the depth chart that, a lot of those guys don't really get to play until like maybe the end of their sophomore, beginning of their junior season. Well, Anderson came in right away and started kicking ass from day one. So I mean, that should show you the level he's played against and the level he's played at, and to kind of put a bow on Will Anderson. A lot of times that I feel like people can get caught in trying to find these perfect like puzzle piece fits, right? Like, oh, Cardinals need an edge rusher. They need to grab X, Y, and Z, right? Oh, okay. What about like Maya J and Cameron Thomas? Look, at the end of the day, good players will make your football team better. Will Anderson is a damn good player, and I don't think any Cardinals fan, should they take him at number 3, it should be upset at all if that's the case, given the other guys on the roster currently.
Yeah, and I think for a team like the Cardinals, if you're gonna draft on need, this rebuild's not gonna last through Ozen Fort or whoever the new head coach is. At this point, and again, I hate to keep bringing it up, 30 free agents. This roster is going to be overhauled. Draft the best player available. And if Chicago was taking that approach, Will Anderson could go 1 if they have the pick still. If Houston was taking that approach, Will Anderson could go 2. So for Arizona to have him there, or the other option, which we'll get to, I think it's a home run and just something you have to. Whoever is writing out the card, that's going to probably be Bidwell's going to be in the draft room, as we always see. And I think if you're Ozen for it, you just tell Bidwell, like, look, just to take the card, run it to wherever you got, put it on the jet. You love flying that jet everywhere. I see so many videos of him flying that jet.
It's a helicopter. He flies it himself.
Oh, now it's a helicopter. And whatever aviation vehicle he wants while he's playing the Wright brothers, get that draft card in and make sure it's Will Anderson or whoever we talk about next.
I was going to say, yeah, Will Anderson, but a very strong number 2 choice in Drew Harbaugh. Jalen Carter, dude, you can't even see Jalen Carter's name with the logo. Gombe. Jalen Carter, defensive lineman, Georgia.
You see that 88 in Georgia, that's all you need to know.
Dude, I was going to say, he's what, 6'3", 300 pounds? I mean, just an absolute monster in the defensive trenches. And you talked about the production of Will Anderson and how, that might be a little bit of a talking point as a down step last year. I mean, just take a look at Jalen Carter's numbers. Obviously, as a defensive interior player, commanding double and triple teams almost every single game. The production isn't necessarily going to be there, but I mean, 2-time college football playoff national champion with Georgia, went back-to-back this year, and then a unanimous All-American this year as well. And let's not forget, Will Anderson, you had made a comment that there wasn't really anybody around him to kind of take the pressure off of him. Jalen Carter established his dominance on a defense you could damn near throw out in the NFL at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's the complete opposite. I mean, they had Travon Walker. Oh my God, I can't even think right now. Walker last year go number 1 to Jacksonville. And then you had Jordan Davis next to him on the line. And I think it was 11 players were drafted off that Georgia team.
Yeah, it was like Nakobe Dean was one of them, right?
Yep. And they completely retooled, like not even retooled. It was just next man up for this Georgia defense. And they're going to have probably close to the same amount of picks this year. And Jalen Carter, again, was the best player last year. He's the best player this year. Anytime you hear Jalen Carter talk about mainstream media, they said if he would have been in the draft last year, he would have been the number 1 pick. And the same could be said this year going around too. Carter, like you said, doesn't have the most impressive numbers, but like, again, I'm not saying he's going to put up like Aaron Donald sack numbers or anything like that. And look at what Aaron Donald's done recently too. He hasn't been this giant disrupting force, but he's somebody that a team has to game plan around. Like when Arizona plays the Rams, the first name they bring up is Aaron Donald. They got to figure out how to game plan around him. If Jalen Carter's able to do that, it's the same thing as Will Anderson bringing pressure off the edge. It's going to free up everybody else to work. Zayvon Collins, Isaiah Simmons, Budda Baker. That's who you guys want to be making the plays. And you have all these first-round picks behind him now because they've been bad for so long, unfortunately. It's just a matter of fact. And Carter, like, you got to have playmakers at each level of the defense. Carter would be able to bring that then.
No, absolutely. You talk about losing J.J. Watt, potential losing Zach Allen. I mean, the defensive line might be the biggest need come draft time. So, Carter, I think, might fit in that mold to where he fits both need and kind of like BPA at that point.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they'll sign like an insurance policy at defensive linemen just in case like Carter isn't there, or like Will Anderson isn't there either. You always have to be prepared in this business, but like Jalen Carter is one of those guys to where like if you just look at the box score, probably not going to wow you, but exactly like you touched on. I mean, the impact he will have on offensive lines moving forward is going to be something very, very notable. And, he'll do the dirty work. He'll free other guys up at the second level, like you talked about, on top of the production and getting to the quarterback and all the TFLs that he can create on his own. I think that's really exciting, especially with your linebacking core that you have, that young athletic interior of Zaven Collins and Isaiah Simmons, like you touched on.
Yeah, for sure. And just like we talked about with Will Anderson too, the off the field stuff is another thing that Jalen Carter is going to be. Georgia's program, can't believe I'm saying it at this point, is basically just Alabama 2.0 at this point. Kirby Smart came from Saban's staff. He's taken everything and taken it over to the SEC East of Georgia. Carter is the same way as Will Anderson is, where off the field, you're going to be working hard. And you talked about I talked about Will Anderson in high school. For Jalen Carter, it wasn't necessarily as much about production in high school either for him, but again, just to speak to his work ethic, and I wrote about this in an article for All Cardinals SI, and you can do all the links and hashtags for me, Donnie, because I can't keep track of them. But Jalen Carter was a state champion weightlifter. Like, he set the record at bench press his senior year at 395. So as an 18-year-old, he's already working hard enough to bench press 395 pounds in the state of Florida, where it's not like you just got normal athletes and he's pulling that off in Delaware. All due respect to Delaware, if you're a Cardinals fan watching this in Delaware.
No shade.
Right. But that's the thing with Carter. It's going to be the same thing. So this is a win-win for Arizona. And like you said, Carter definitely fits more of a need and BPA. So I think that may be the better scenario. If there is one, I think either one you're going to come out as a win if you're a Cardinals fan and the team in general. So either way, I think we'll be okay.
No, absolutely. And I think to kind of, circle around, put a wrap up on this discussion, I guess, there's really no lose-lose here for the Cardinals, right? Like, no. If either Jalen Carter or Will Anderson are on the board, great. From there you can get into it. I'm sure we'll dive a little bit deeper into the Carter-Anderson debate. If those two are available for the Cardinals at number 3, I never really thought about what would happen, because in my mind, this entire offseason, in my head, how it's gone is you either take Anderson or you either take Carter. And just really quick, we'll switch over here, because Monty Ossenfort, at his opening press conference, whenever he was officially introduced, had mentioned the possibility, and granted, it's just a GM doing his job, nothing groundbreaking, no breaking news here. He said that the phones ring a lot throughout the draft, and, that they're going to evaluate all their options as they should. And, if they want to move down, they'll move down. If they want to stay at number 3 and pick somebody, they'll stay at number 3 and pick somebody. There's a lot of talk about Bryce Young, and I've been very, very guilty of it, of him going number 1. Or him maybe even going number 2, Andrew Harbaugh. You're telling me there's a shot that Will Levis can come in here and just absolutely wreck the 2023 NFL draft at the top of the board?
I mean, I think it could be Will Levis or it could be CJ Stroud. One thing I was literally just watching before I got on here with you was Mel Kiper's mock draft yesterday, and he was talking about, and I tweeted about it yesterday because he said the same thing yesterday, was – what's the one quarterback that has the least bad things said about him in this draft class so far? And it would be CJ Stroud, because the biggest thing you had was the competition and how he handles adversity. And that Georgia game, he answered that. Given it's a 1-game sample size, but like Will Levis, for him, it's, are you going to bet on the traits and this great kid that you hear about around the facility and around the campus, who on film is very meh. Like, I finished my Will Levis evaluation. He got a 3rd-round grade from me. And if you look at Bryce Young, they are worried about weight, and they're talking about him wanting to come into the combine weighing 210. Unless
# water weight.
Water, creatine, and peanut butter and jelly is like, that's literally what I think his week is going to be at leading up to the combine. So, but at the same time, I have no problem with Bryce Young's size. And if you're a Cardinals fan, you're used to that argument being made for your quarterback. So, and quarterback's not in the cards here, no pun intended, for Arizona. But the teams ahead of them, like we talked about, Chicago has Justin Fields. That's the answer there, I think. I truly believe they're going to trade out. I think they trade out with someone like Indianapolis, who Chris Ballard is, without getting too much into them for analysis, I think he realizes I got to quit using my Southern draw that just sound funny during press conferences and smart whipped, and I need to actually do something apart from just relying on my 2018 draft class carrying my resume. And you also have teams like Las Vegas with Derek Carr. You have Atlanta, who doesn't know what they're going to do. Carolina. There's plenty of teams that need to make a move here. And whether it's Chicago at 1, whether it's Arizona at 3, because teams are going to want to jump Indianapolis too. There's just no real telling what can happen here. And whether it's a Will Levis cyclone thrown at the top or a CJ Stroud one, like we said beforehand, I love when the draft, you don't know what's going to happen. Like the years when you had, like we talked about, Clowney, Myles Garrett, them, you knew what was going to happen at the top. But like this year, there's so much chaos. And Houston showed it last year, taking Derek Stingley instead of Sauce Gardner, which Stingley was hurt all year and held out, and they played it safe with him, so we don't know what he's going to be like. But at this point, that looks like the wrong choice. So Houston's not afraid of doing what they want to do. They still have their GM there in Caserio, so he's going to be able to do what he wants to do. Is that Will Levis? Is that CJ Stroud? That's the chaos grenade that Arizona has to be ready for.
No, I think you hit a really good point, too. Teams are going to do what they want to do. I think glaring examples of that have been the Giants in recent years and even the Raiders in recent years, too. Because just like not exactly listening to the status quo, not, going along with everybody's mock drafts and who they want them to take and trying to go get their guys. So obviously, I feel like more times than not, their guys normally don't end up panning out like they think they do. They try to outsmart themselves somewhat, but I mean, dude, just looking at the board, like if you're Arizona, behind you, you already said you have Indianapolis at 4. Would love to go get a quarterback. You have Detroit, which I think they stay with Jared Goff for another year, but you never know. I think it would be smart to go up and get a guy, sit behind Goff for a year. But I mean, that's why I'm just a white dude on a podcast. So I'm not running the football team. You pointed out Las Vegas, Atlanta, Carolina. Maybe even Tennessee at 11.
Yeah.
You just not exactly sure. But where I think things kind of get funky and out of play here, Houston has the number 12 pick too, thanks to Cleveland. They would be more than happy if their guy isn't there. Trade that number 2 pick, maybe somewhere between that 6 to 9 range, recoup crazy draft capital, and then take 2 pretty damn good players within the top 12.
Yeah, that's something I really didn't even think about here either. And another team that's in a similar situation, just for another trade down partners, like the Jets, if they don't get Aaron Rodgers, like the Nathaniel Hackett hire that just happened, is kind of leaning towards maybe that's what their plan is. Washington says they're going to go ahead with Sam Howell. Who knows? But yeah, there's several teams here in the top 18 that Houston could be like, hey, we'll be happy with whoever from picks this way to this way. And they could trade back. And then that's even a bigger chaos grenade that would get thrown into everything. So there's a lot of moving parts and different things that if you're the Cardinals, you kind of have to be prepared for. So you don't have a Jacksonville Jaguars draft day Bo Callahan situation where you make some horrible trade. But I don't think Osaford's going to do it like that. So he's been around too much. And I think the New England in him is going to be more than prepared for whatever happens and kind of just go with the flow of things.
No, absolutely. I forgot who said this, but stay ready so you don't have to get ready. I think is really good mantra to apply here. Now, Andrew, I do want to ask you 2 questions. Number 1, if either Carter or Anderson are there, and we'll say, I'll run this by you first. Indianapolis picks up the phone. Either Anderson or Carter are there. They're like, hey, we want to move up 1 spot. We're going to take this guy. We're going to take whoever quarterback, Stroud, Levis, whoever it is. Pretty easy, yes, right? Because like you let Indy move up, you get some draft capital, maybe like a 3rd rounder to move up 1 spot, and then you still get your guy at number 4. It's kind of like a no-brainer there, right?
Yeah, and I think it would have to be. And my worry is I would love that. I don't know if Chris Ballard would be oblivious to the fact that if Carter and Anderson are there, that they know Arizona's not going to take a quarterback. I think the bigger angle would be if, and I don't know how this works in war rooms, but like if that happens, there's only going to be one quarterback left, whether it be Stroud, Young, or Levis, that someone like a Carolina, like one of those teams we talked about later, they're calling Arizona and they're like, okay, hey, we got to do this. And then I would call it Indianapolis at that point and be like, look, I've got this team on the other line. What are you going to do? Like kind of outbid them type of thing. I think that would be more of the angle. But I think Chris Ballard, we'll go through free agency because he's infamous for not spending money, which is hilarious when you consider his owner, all he does is buy rock and roll memorabilia. Chris Ballard is the savings account for that team, and he needs to spend more this year. Like I said, again, not to turn this into a Colts podcast, but you need to, if you're Chris Ballard, realize my seat is hot. There is not many GMs in the NFL who survive 2 coaching changes and keep their jobs at the same time. Yep. And if you're Ballard, you need to realize that. And I think you need to be aggressive. And I think a trade up makes sense, even if it's one spot. That being said, maybe Chicago doesn't trade one. I think for that to happen, like you just talked about, to give your sense a little bit more float here, or situation a little bit more weight, I think you need Chicago to keep one, and they take Jalen Carter or Will Anderson. Houston takes a quarterback, and then you just have a bidding war at 3, whether it be with Arizona, whether it be with Atlanta, Carolina, so on. So, like I said, I really think this is where everyone talked about it not being a very good GM spot for compared to the other openings and just everything else. Arizona, to me, I think is one of the best places you could go if you're a coach or a GM, because this off season is perfect. Literally, you're playing Madden creative mode basically at this point, where you're just going to have a lot of fun, be able to kind of make this how you want it. And plus now with whoever the head coach is in, that might even direct what they do more as well.
No, for sure. Like you talked about already, the number 3 pick, I mean, a very nice place to live in general. 30 plus free agents heading into the offseason. So you're going to have the opportunity to mold yourself around him. And then obviously you have a franchise quarterback who is rehabbing a torn ACL, but the assumption is that he'll someday return back to the Kyler Murray that everybody saw, and hopefully you get a better offensive mind than Cliff Kingsbury to come in. It's really funny the comparison you made to the Colts, and it's just kind of their situation right now, because Cardinals fans are very familiar with an owner / front office that does not like to spend money, and a GM who probably shouldn't have survived 2 head coaching changes, because Steve Keim survived 3. Yeah. And there was a lot of talk about him surviving a 4th one too, before he stepped down due to health reasons, quote unquote. But moving on, how far is too far if you're the Cardinals, right? Because Vegas, maybe Atlanta, Carolina, you're still picking top 10, but like how far is a little bit too far, in just in terms of like getting significant capital to kind of add to your team? Because there's a lot of spots the Cardinals need to add. I mean, if they can go just BPA the first 3 or 4 rounds, that would be great, regardless of the position. But I mean, you're looking at like offensive tackle prospects with like right around like the Atlanta pick. You're looking at maybe corner prospects right around that pick as well. We already touched on like the draft being so unpredictable. You don't really know what's going to happen, but it feels like quarterbacks and edge are going to dominate maybe the top 4, top 5. And then from there, the rest of the positions are going to kind of like fill themselves.
Yeah. And and like you talked about tackle or defensive line or edge, those are really the deep spots of this draft class. So I would be comfortable with them. I'm looking here as you were asking me that. As long as they stay, I'm trying to think of realistic trade teams. Like, say the Jets call because they're desperate after not getting Aaron Rodgers, say. I'd be as happy as falling back as far as 13. And because the draft capital you would gain by a team moving up 10 spots would be astronomical. That would be number 1, where it's going to be hard to ignore. And yeah, like the example goes with lottery tickets. Would you rather have a guaranteed winner in your hand, or would you like to have 5 more chances at the Powerball? GMs usually take 5 more chances at the Powerball. So, that's one example as far as 13. I don't think they fall that far. I think they realistically stay in the top 10. Like I think Carolina at 9 would be the furthest they would go back. But that being said, if they're at 8 or 9, edge options would be like Miles Murphy out of Clemson. You've got Lucas Van Ness, who's skyrocketing up boards right now out of Iowa. And then you've got the Pitt defensive tackle who appeared in Kuiper's mock draft in the top 10 yesterday, who's very undersized. But again, obviously you don't scout the helmet, you scout the player. Pitt has been known to make decent undersized interior defensive linemen.
They've done all right.
NFL products in the past. So they will have options there if you're looking at defense between those three guys. And if you look at tackle, Broderick Jones is as good of a prospect as Jalen Carter on some situations, as some people compare it to. So I think if you got something like a Broderick Jones, I don't know if he'd last to 8 or 9, but you've got some other tackles there in Jalen Duncan, Peter Skoronski as well.
Paris
so, I mean, yeah, you've got different – there's more depth at those positions in need where you can – again, it would kind of be like Jalen Carter. You can double dip in the BPA but also a need category where trading back, A, gets you the capital, and then B, you aren't going to get a star from the draft, but that doesn't mean you're going to get a bad player either.
No, for sure. I think Austin Fort inherited a situation to where he knows the Cardinals aren't necessarily going to turn themselves around within 1 year. This really feels – I don't want to call it a rebuild because I think they should not go full rebuild. But there's obviously like – yeah, there's a lot of things that kind of need to happen in order for the ship to right itself. But, I mean, dude, if you just – do what you need to do in the draft, and like Austin Fort's a smart guy too. Obviously you alluded to his experience in New England. I think he built a pretty damn good roster in Tennessee too. They made the playoffs 2 out of 3 years. He was there as their director of player personnel. So it seems like he knows what he's doing. He comes from a winning background. Hopefully the Cardinals can kind of soak all of that stuff up from there. But dude, like BPA trade down, it's going to be so chaotic to see how the next couple months fall out. Like you said, we have the Senior Bowl next week. We have the Shrine Bowl this week. We have the Combine the first week of March in Indianapolis. And then from there, you kind of see all hell breaking loose on top of free agency, helping fill some of the needs as well. Andrew, I cannot wait for us to break all that stuff down and more. Thank you so much. Where can people find you on Twitter?
You can find me at Andrew Harbaugh _ and then obviously all my stuff's going to be on All Cardinals. Scouting reports, trade scenarios, draft scenarios. We're going through it all. And like I said, that's the best part with this team right now, where if you're a fan, you're probably not happy you have that number 3 content. If you're someone creating content for this team, number 3 is fantastic. But no, there's a couple different things they've got to weigh and decisions, stuff like that. And we'll break that all down, including, like I talked about, and this will be probably my next piece, is they, I think, need a short-term answer at quarterback because you don't know when Kyler's going to be back. He took that extended rehab before getting his ACL repaired. Kyler might not even play next year. We might be talking about Cardinals having a top 5 pick again next year. So that's a reality I think people need to be prepared for. But at the same time, somebody needs to play quarterback, and it cannot be Trace McSorley or Colt McCoy.
Yo, dude, not to get into it too much, but I think it might be Colt McCoy. But we'll see. Plenty of options.
I won't allow it. I'll write all the content I need just so this before it gets really annoyed, and I'll start sending it directly to him. So I will not allow it.
Absolutely. All right. For Andrew Harbaugh, I am Donnie Druin. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the All Cardinals podcast, the first of many draft podcasts. Like Andrew said, the number 3 overall pick. So exciting to have. If you are 2 dudes like us, probably not great if you're a fan, like Andrew already said. But go ahead and find all of our work at allcardinals.com or slide.com/NFL/Cardinals. We will be back soon. Do not worry. But until then, thank you so much for listening and have a great day.